Good morning, Realtors. This is Nick Romitis, your CEO, checking in with you on Friday, January the 15th. And I'm pleased to present the special broker edition for you today. We have a number of special guests to give us some important federal updates and a few state updates from our first week of legislative session here in South Carolina. I'd like to introduce our 2021 president, Morris Lyles. Morris, good morning.
Good morning, Nick. Thank you. I wanted to introduce myself a little bit and tell you a little bit about me because this is my first Facebook meeting or Zoom call here. I wanted to let everybody know that I've been involved with realtor organizations since 1999 when I served on the Central Carolina Association of Realtors Circle of Excellence Committee. Then I began to serve on the CCRA Board of Directors in 2009. Then I was president in 2015. Then I served as Member Services Chair for SCR in 2016. In 2017, I was the RPAC Trustees Chair, and then served as Secretary, then Treasurer, last year as President-elect, and this year as President. In my career, I have worked as a broker in charge with ERA Wilder Realty here in Columbia. And now I'm back in production as an agent with ERA Wilder in the downtown Columbia office. My wife, Sarah, is the director of Palmetto Pride, the state anti-litter organization. So she's staying pretty busy. And we have two daughters, Elise that is 9 and Sadie that will be 8 at the end of the month. I love to be outdoors when I do have time to do that. And I look forward to working with everybody this year as president. And if I can do anything to help, let me know. Now that I've told you a little bit about myself, let me introduce our guest speaker today, Megan Booth. Megan serves as the Director of Federal Housing and Commercial Policy for the National Association of Realtors, where she's worked for more than 20 years. Topics under her purview include federal housing programs such as FHA mortgage insurance, VA loans, rural housing programs, as well as multifamily and property management issues. A native of Massachusetts, Megan received her BA from the George Washington University and a master's degree from George Mason University. Megan lives in Arlington, Virginia with her husband and 3 children. Megan, thanks for joining us today, and we look forward to hearing what you got for us.
Thank you so much for having me today. Let me see if I can. There we go.
Megan, while you're launching that, let me say real quick, we're broadcasting live on Facebook this morning, and so for our realtors that are listening in, please, if you have any questions during the broadcast, put them in the comments on the Facebook page. I'll be monitoring those, and I'll share those with Megan and staff as appropriate. So thank you.
Great. So thanks, everybody. I'm going to try and get you all up to speed on what's been going on. As I'm sure you're aware, DC has been an incredibly busy place over the last month. And so we have a lot to talk about. And I do have notes, so I don't usually use notes when I'm reading, but there's this bill that I'm going to start talking about, the COVID relief bill that passed in December, had over 5,000 pages in it. And there were a lot of things that we had been working for over the last many months. And so these are some of the things I'm going to go over. The bill also included all of the FY21 appropriations for Congress, as well as a number of tax extender provisions and a bunch of things that we had been hoping to get. So lots of good stuff in here, and I'm just going to give you a brief summary. So the first one has to do with unemployment assistance. The legislation increased the total unemployment someone's eligible for from 39 weeks to 50 weeks, and it also extended the pandemic unemployment through March of 2021. So that means that people can also get the additional supplemental federal benefits of $300 a week through that. There are some new return to work reporting requirements in the bill that that requires people who are collecting this unemployment to report what they're doing in terms of their job search, but also requires employers to report if someone turns down a job that they have been offered. That's to try and make sure that people are, in fact, doing their best to get back to work. The small business loan program, which was available last summer, and we know a lot of realtors took advantage of. This is the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, and the EIDL, the Emergency Disaster Loan Program. So this program reopened now. It allows for someone to take out a second loan. So if you took a PPP the beginning of last summer, for example, you could take another one. It appropriated over $284 billion for PPP loans and $20 billion for the EIDL loans. So the good thing about this is a lot of realtors didn't think they were eligible for a PPP because they don't get a traditional paycheck. But in fact, the PPP loan program allows you to take a PPP loan for your own pay. Your own pay counts as your payroll. So hopefully real estate markets are up and running and doing really well. So hopefully none of you are in need of this, but it does open it up. It also makes 501c6s eligible for PPP loans, which most of our state associations are registered as, both at the state and local level. So I know a lot of states and locals lost a lot of revenue this year for events they couldn't put on and other things. And so they are also eligible for a PPP loan. There are some requirements surrounding the amount of lobbying that organization can do. That was one thing that was why they weren't included earlier, was because if they spent a lot of their revenue on lobbying, they couldn't do that. But there's some kind of hard lines in it now that we think will make most of our associations eligible if that's something that they feel like they still need. The next one is near and dear to my heart. This is one that I work on for NAR, and I can tell you that we started working on this issue of rental assistance literally in March of last year. We sent our first letter on March 19th of 2020 to the Congress urging rental assistance, because we could see right away how many people in, say, the hospitality industry and the retail industry were losing their jobs and weren't going to be able to pay their rent. Since that first letter on March 19th, we sent another 34 letters to Congress, to Capitol Hill, to the administration, to the White House with respect to rental assistance. And so I'm really excited to talk about the program that's included in this legislation. So first, let me say that there was rental assistance proposed in a bill set forth by the House last June. And we were very thankful that they supported a rental assistance program, but we were not crazy about how it was structured. The money was going to be paid to the renter. The money was going to go through a tiny little program in HUD that nobody had really heard of, the Emergency Homeless Grant Program. We were worried about the capacity of organizations to use that program and get the money out the door right away. So we spent a lot of time educating members of Congress, educating the agencies on the need to get this money out the door as quickly as possible, but most importantly, to make sure that money actually went to housing providers. We know a lot of states had rental assistance programs, and if the money went to renters, it wasn't always used to pay the rent. And so in order to make sure that the rental housing stock stays stable in our country, which is such a critical part of our housing infrastructure, that we need to make sure that housing providers are getting paid. So this bill provides for $25 billion total in rental assistance. It's going to be allocated to the states based on population. I looked up South Carolina and now I can't remember how much it is. You guys are going to get a total of, I think it's 50, let me find it right here.
It's about 340 million, I think.
43 million. Yep, 343 million. Thanks, Nick. That your state is going to be able to get. They had to apply by this past Tuesday, the 12th. The turnaround time was insane. But the purpose of that was to try and make sure the money gets out the door as quickly as possible. It's being allocated through the Treasury Department, who we've heard the Trump administration, this is trying to be one of the last things that the Trump officials at the Treasury Department do before they leave town next week. They are trying to get this money out the door as quickly as possible. So housing providers can apply on behalf of their tenants. Tenants can also apply, but in both cases, the money goes to the housing provider. The only time that the money would not go to the housing provider is if the housing provider refuses it. So if a housing provider refuses to accept the money from the allocating agency, which in most cases is going to be either a housing finance agency, a housing authority, or a community development program, whatever your authority is in your state that is the jurisdiction that gets the money. The only way the renter would get the money directly is if the housing provider refuses to accept it. The money can include current rent and actually up to 6 months of future rent, back rent, utilities, and other payments, which can include your late fees and penalties that you are allowed to charge under the CDC eviction moratorium. This money is available through December 31st of 2021. However, in September, the Treasury Department is going to see where all the states are with their allocation of the money. And if they have not been using the money, they can reclaim that money and reallocate it to a state that needs it. So you want to make sure that your state is getting that money out the door as quickly as possible. The bill also did extend the existing CDC moratorium through this month, through January. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, but as of right now, it's extended through the end of this month. We continue to have meetings. We've had meetings with Trump Treasury officials, with incoming Biden transition Treasury officials, with Republicans on Capitol Hill, with Democrats on Capitol Hill about how this program should be administered. And we're hoping that Treasury puts out some additional guidance to states as soon as possible. We have 5 main talking points, but real quickly, I'll just say most of them have to do with flexibility. We want this program to be as easy as possible for housing providers to use. So low documentation requirements, low barriers to entry. So we think anyone who's eligible for the CDC eviction moratorium should be eligible for the rental assistance. So if you have tenants who sign that CDC eviction moratorium, one of the things they say in that is that they have been asking for federal rental assistance. So if they said that, we think that then they should be able to get this rental assistance, and you should be able to get that rental assistance on their behalf. So the biggest thing is flexibility and making sure that the money can get out the door as quickly as possible and into the hands of housing providers. Other provisions, as hopefully you all know, there are direct payments to individuals, $600 for those making up to $75,000. This is slightly lower than what the bill was that gave out direct payments in the spring. $75,000 or $150 for a couple, then you're eligible. Also an extra $600 per eligible dependent. It provided $7 billion for expanding broadband access, mostly in rural communities. And this is important too. It extends the deadline for state CARES Act money. The money that states were provided last June or May under the CARES Act expired at the end of December. And so this bill extended that through the end of this year. And that money can, if your state was using that money for rental assistance, they can continue to use that money for rental assistance on top of the federal rental assistance. There are also a number of tax provisions in this bill. So there's 2 that are COVID related. The first is the employee retention tax credit. Basically, it made it more generous. It increased the credit rate from 50% to 70%. This is for employers and extended the credit through June 30th. It also extended the payroll tax credit for sick and family leave through March 31st of 2021. Now, there were a bunch of other tax provisions that have nothing to do with COVID that were included in this bill, and a number of these were ones that we were pushing for. So big one was the exclusion of income for debt forgiveness extended for 5 years through 2025. So especially during this pandemic, if you have homeowners who are still in crisis and aren't going to be able to start making their mortgage payments at the end of the COVID, once COVID is over and once their forbearance period is over, if they ended up having to do a short sale or foreclosure, which hopefully most people will not have to do because the housing market is so strong, hopefully they'll just be able to sell their house. But if they ended up having any mortgage debt forgiven, the mortgage debt exclusion is available. It corrects a little technical problem in depreciating residential rental housing from the last tax bill. It was just a technical fix, but it was important to people who do depreciate rental housing. Some great enhancements to the low-income housing tax credit, which is really the only federal program for creating affordable housing. They created a permanent 4% credit for part of the low-income housing tax credit. Supposed to be a great improvement, so we're excited to see about that. It made all business mails fully deductible for 2021 and 2022, and it extended the mortgage insurance premium deduction through the end of this year. So some great provisions there. There were also a few in the tax area. The 179D energy efficient improvement deduction for commercial properties was made permanent. So this is excellent for our commercial members. This was always sort of coming in and out of the tax code, but now it made it permanent. So that's great. I mentioned the mortgage insurance one, and the energy efficient homes credit was also extended for 1 year. So people that do energy efficient improvements to their homes. Okay, a few other provisions that were in the bill. They kind of added soup and nuts into this bill. They just kept adding more and more provisions as time went by. So the first one is it requires carbon monoxide detectors in all federally assisted properties. This includes private properties that accept housing vouchers. So you have to have carbon monoxide detectors. There were a few cases in the last 5 years of some devastating tragedies that happened in properties that didn't have carbon monoxide detectors. So that's the reason for that. Increased funding for fair housing enforcement that NAR had been pushing for, which was great. Also a small increase, $25 million increase in housing counseling. We think there may be people who are going to need some housing counseling who have been in forbearance, for example. So that was in there. And then the bill also reauthorized the Water Resources Development Act, which funds a number of different water infrastructure projects, including water management, flood control, drinking water, things like that. So some good stuff in that bill. So like I said, this bill was huge, 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 included a lot of provisions that NAR had been supporting and a bunch of programs that will help with the COVID relief. So what are NAR's next steps with this whole thing? So the first one is to make sure that the rental assistance is working. So like I said, states should start to get the money in the next 7 to 10 days. As those states implement those programs, we want to make sure that it's working well. The biggest part of that is some states, South Carolina not among them, but some states, we heard rumors of them trying to put on provisions like, okay, you can use this rental assistance money, but landlords, you can only get 60 cents on the dollar. Or if you get this money, you can't evict your tenant for the next 2 years, or things like that. Those are things that are going to make that program unsuccessful, right? Landlords are not going to participate. That is not going to be a useful program, and that does not lead to the sustainability of the rental housing market. So we want to make sure the program works seamlessly. There were some great states that had rental assistance programs, Mississippi being one that stands out. Their state rental assistance program was fantastic and was oversubscribed within several weeks when they started it because it was so successful and so easy to use. So we hope we see that. If we can find successful programs and the money going out the door quickly, that is going to help our efforts to get more rental assistance money. So the bill included $25 billion for rental assistance, which is great, but that's really a down payment. So all the estimates say that by December of 2020, last year, the need was $70 billion. So $25 billion is nice, but we're going to need a lot more of that. So if we can find successful programs where the money's getting out there, people are staying in their homes and landlords are getting paid, we can use that to get more money for rental assistance. We want to make sure, and I mentioned this briefly, we limit foreclosures and the impact on people's credit long-term. So a lot of people who went into forbearance may or may not have a good understanding of what that really meant. I can't tell you the number of people in my neighborhood are like, yeah, I took that forbearance. They just have to like forgive my home mortgage payments for a year. I'm like, that's not what forbearance is. Forbearance does not equal forgiveness. A lot of people weren't really sure what they were getting themselves into and may have not agreed to the best terms excuse me, when their forbearance is over. NAR does have 2 great pamphlets. If you go on nar.realtor or realtorparty.realtor and type in protect your investment, we have 2 different pamphlets for consumers about how to protect their credit and how to protect their home when they're in forbearance. And what's great about these pamphlets is they're really pretty full color, but they also have a little blank spot for you to personalize it with your own company information. So this is a great tool you can use to reach out to clients you have who've purchased a home in the past that might need some assistance now. Great consumer brochures that you can personalize with your own information. So called Protect Your Investment, if you check those out. We are also in the process of writing a brochure, which should be out in the next 2 weeks, I hope, about what are your alternatives to foreclosure. So when people start coming out of forbearance, if they are still legitimately in trouble and can't make up their payments and need to get out of that home, we don't want people going into foreclosure. Like I said, markets are super strong right now. Home values should have gone up. Foreclosure should not be their only option. They should either, number one, ideally, they just sell their home. If they can't sell their home, a short sale or a deed in lieu is a much, much better option for their long-term credit than a foreclosure. So we expect to come out with a new brochure on that in the next 2 weeks about those different options and what people should be looking for. Moreover, the CARES Act provided provisions to protect people when they're in forbearance from their credit being impacted. So while they were under forbearance that was provided under the CARES Act, the lender was required to report them as being current on their mortgage payments. Anecdotally, we've heard that's not what's actually been happening, that they've been reporting them as current, but then put like a little note current on their forbearance agreement, which is not the intent of the CARES Act at all. So that's something we're going to continue to work on Congress with and with the CFPB to make sure that people who took forbearance, who then are able to resume their regular payments and get back on schedule, their credit should not be hurt. So if they want to refinance or move to a different home, they should be able to do that when the forbearance is over. The last thing I'm going to mention is state and local taxes. So the pandemic has taken a large toll on state and local governments. First, from their loss of tax revenue from businesses that may not be operating at full capacity during the pandemic, also costs of PPE and all the different things they've had to pay for during the pandemic. So what do states do when they run into trouble? A lot of times they turn to real estate taxes as a way to make up those shortfalls. So we have some great resources on realtorparty.realtor/state and local issues, where we're tracking what all the different states are doing with respect to tax provisions. So we want to make sure that the impact on state and local taxes is as limited as possible. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to talk about, and this one I definitely have notes for, because I literally wrote this in the last 2 hours. As many of you may know, last night at 7 p.m. Eastern, President-elect Biden came out with his COVID relief proposal, which is trillions of dollars. I forget the actual number. It's many trillions of dollars. Giant COVID relief package. So let me start off by saying, this is the president-elect's proposal. He can't just implement this. This is going to go through Congress. So NAR has plenty of time to lobby for the stuff that we care about in the bill, to lobby against the stuff we may not like in the bill. So this is a long process. He outlined it broadly yesterday. So these are some of the things that I pulled out to talk to you briefly about. So the first one is he wants to increase the amount that people are getting in the individual relief checks. So the bill, people are literally getting checks today for $600 from the IRS based on the December bill. He wants to do another $1,400 an individual for a total of $2,000. So that's the first thing. The second thing is continuing to extend unemployment. This would extend it through September 30th. We'll also fully fund states' short-term compensation programs, which are actually really important for small businesses that are not operating at full capacity. So I don't know where you are in South Carolina, but here in Virginia, restaurants, for example, can only be open at 50%. So obviously they're not getting the full income that they usually get. So the short-term compensation programs help. If a business is keeping people on, but they're only part-time, they can get like part-time unemployment as well to make up their full salary, so they can keep those workers employed. So that is a great program that he included in there. It does extend the eviction moratorium through September 30th. I have to be honest, this is not surprising. When the legislation came out in December and said that it extended the eviction moratorium through January 30th, the first thing I said was, well, the new president's not going to come in and see a million people or millions of people evicted on a second week of office, right? So not surprising. September 30th is a little bit longer than I thought. I thought it might be June 30th. But again, this is just a legislative proposal. This is not law. So as of right now, the eviction moratorium ends in 15 days. I think he will use executive authority to extend the CDC moratorium. Hopefully it's not through September 30th, but we shall see. But I would expect that to happen. So I do not think on February 1st you're going to be able to evict people. I could be wrong, but I don't think that's going to happen. The good news is that he provides an additional $25 billion in rental assistance, so doubles the amount of money for the rental assistance program, which is excellent and doesn't change any of the existing guidelines for the program in his proposal. Again, the broad proposal he put out was like 10 pages, so it doesn't have all the details, and the devil is always in the details, but this is what we have so far. On top of that, it provides $5 billion specifically for homeless assistance for families that are already experiencing homelessness. It will extend mortgage forbearance for federally connected mortgages. So FHA, VA, rural housing, Freddie and Fannie mortgages. It will extend the mortgage forbearance program also through September 30th. Provides $15 billion in hardest hit funds for businesses. So this is excellent, provides forgivable grants to small businesses that are at risk of closing or have been hard hit by the pandemic. So this is restaurants, retail, hotels, inns, things like that have been really hard hit by the pandemic. It provides $20 billion to help public transit systems, something I really hadn't sort of put together, but I don't know, in my area, everyone is working from home, so no one is taking the Metro. So Metro's budget is all based on how much revenue they collect from people taking the Metro, and no one's taking it. So this gives money, $15 billion, it'll be handed out to states based on their transit systems and how much their transit systems are generally used and how much they're used now. So $20 billion for that. $350 billion for emergency funding for state and localities. So as I just mentioned, one of the things we're most worried about is states and localities increasing taxes to make up revenue shortfalls. This would be a start. $350 billion for states and localities to help cover their costs. Excuse me. And there's a bunch of tax provisions, including the sick leave, extending that sick leave benefit that I talked about a little bit earlier, child care credit, the earned income tax credit, a bunch of other things with respect to, improving people's individuals' tax positions for the coming year due to the pandemic. So as I said, this is a proposal. So it has to go to the full Congress, and NAR, of course, has friends on both sides of the aisle that we will help push for those provisions we like, and less for those that we don't. Things we will be, one more thing I forgot to mention that we will be trying to get, which is not something that was thought of highly by Democrats in the last Congress, but I think we've done a lot of education since then on that, which is the liability protection for businesses that are open and are doing their best to comply with local, state and federal standards for how to run their business during a pandemic. We really believe they should get some sort of liability protection so they can't be sued if someone, for example, catches COVID while visiting their business. So we will continue to push on that. Real quickly, wanted to talk about a couple things that we will be advocating for in this new Congress. President-elect Biden has proposed a $15,000 tax credit for first-time homebuyers. NAR supported a similar tax credit back in 2009, which was super successful in revitalizing the housing market then. I will say, I don't know about in your area, but in many parts of the country, the problem is not that first-time homebuyers don't have the down payment as much anymore. That's certainly true, but the bigger issue is supply. And so how do we get more supply? You could have all the buyers in the world, but if there's nothing for them to buy, they're still not going to get into a home. So our federal taxation committee passed several new policies related to incentivizing supply, both by encouraging sales of existing homes and also for new construction. So those are things we will absolutely be pushing for with this new Congress. And we've gotten some positive reaction to this to date from members of Congress about those proposals. So yes, tax incentives for first-time home buyers, great, but really the problem at this point is supply, and how can we incentivize supply? The second thing is President Biden talked negatively about the 1031 like-kind exchange program during the campaign. So this is something we were very well aware of, and in fact have spent a lot of money in the last year updating our research on the benefits of the 1031 like-kind exchange program, and I will also mention opportunity zones as well, and showing the benefits to communities of the 1031 like-kind exchange. For those of you who are familiar with the program, this program is not a tax elimination program. It's simply a tax deferral program that creates new incentives, new development in communities. So we have a whole bunch of research on this. We are fully prepared to go into an all-out battle to protect the 1031 like-kind exchange. So please know that we will be doing that. Fair housing, huge priority for NAR. We will continue to work on fair housing. The legislative issue we're going to start with is a bill that would track racially restrictive covenants and other discriminatory language in deeds. So there's millions of homes out there that have deeds that contain racially restrictive covenants in them. And most times homeowners have no idea that they're in there because they're in the tiny little print of your deed that you never read at all. So that's something we're going to be supporting. Infrastructure, there's been a big push to do infrastructure. We continue to support infrastructure, livable communities, enhancing economic vitality of communities. So we think that investing in highways, transit systems, reducing congestion, and fostering economic growth are important. So we will continue to fight for those in the transportation space and infrastructure space. Lastly, access to credit. I mentioned this a little bit before. One other sort of aspect of that is closing the racial homeownership gap. The homeownership rate for Black Americans right now is literally back to where it was before the Civil Rights Act, which is devastating to hear. So we continue to work with a number of groups, including our partners at NARAB, to figure out ways to try and close that gap. This is a link to some of the resources we have on our website related to our response to COVID and where we are with our federal advocacy. These are updated all of the time. So the breaking news I just gave you about the Biden plan, that's not up there yet, but should be up there by the end of the day. We're working on a summary of his proposal. And so we are updating stuff on these pages constantly, like at least once a week or more often as warranted once we have more information. So please check back there. You can always reach out to us here with any questions you have, but we're trying to get as much information out there as quickly as possible. Things are changing fast here in Washington, and we're trying to stay on top of it.
All right. Thanks, Megan. Nick, did we get any questions online?
We did. We did have a couple of questions, Mr. President. Megan, one of the burning questions has to do with the rental assistance program. And I know that we had a deadline last week for states and counties to apply. What happens after that application process? How do we, because I've got members asking, you know, how
do you get the money?
How do you get the money? Is there a link where I can go apply? Do you know? Do you know how that process is going to actually work in each state?
So yes and no. Unfortunately, it can be very different in each state. So we are going to be monitoring this. The deadline was Tuesday for states and localities to apply. I will say that we are urging Treasury to have a little bit of grace with respect to that, because there may be states that we don't know. We hope everyone made that deadline, but if they didn't, you know, a lot of states or a few states had governor elections and changed their government over just a week before. So they may not have gotten their stuff together in time to apply for that. But for those states that made the deadline, we believe that money is going to be sent out to the states in the next 5 to 10 days. So then the important thing is, how are the states going to implement it? The Treasury has not released a lot of guidance. We are strongly urging them to put out guidance as quickly as possible, urging states to put as few strings on that program as possible to make it as seamless as possible. For example, one of the things I'm most worried about is, while landlords are allowed to apply on behalf of their residents, they have to do it with the approval of the resident, is what the legislation says. I think that needs to be incredibly flexible. So let's say you're a landlord, you have a tenant who hasn't paid in 6 months. It's January 15th. You call them up today and say, hey, I want to apply for rental assistance on your behalf. It'll cover all your past rent. Is that renter answering the phone? No, they think you're evicting them in 15 days on January 30th. So they are not responding to you. They are ghosting you as much as possible because they're afraid you're evicting them in 15 days. So we have urged Treasury officials, both with the Trump administration and with the incoming Biden administration, you cannot require a wet signature from a resident on a form that the landlord has, because they are just simply not going to do it. So again, we're urging that if a resident signed that CDC declaration, has their name on that CDC declaration, which gave them the eviction moratorium, then that should be good enough. If the landlord then sends a certified letter to that resident saying, I am asking for rental assistance on your behalf. So states are going to have some flexibility on how they do it. We hope it's as simple as possible. What we will be doing is, and I can put a link in the chat that Nick, you could then put on Facebook, to where we are going to have a list of what the states are doing. We're going to have a chart that lists all the state programs as we find out about them. We were going to start populating that as soon as possible. And so when we have that, we are going to put the links directly on our website so that landlords can find out where they can apply. So every state's going to be a little different, unfortunately. As I said, I hope Treasury puts out some really clear guidance, and we've been working with them on that language, and I'm happy to share that with anyone who wants to know the specific language we've been doing. I'm happy to provide some more information about that. But we are hoping that we can start populating that list so people know where to apply. But the goal is to get the money out the door right away.
Thank you, Megan. I'd love to read all of the thank yous that we're getting on Facebook. Our members are very much appreciative of the update, and we're thankful for our NAR staff that have been advocating, I know, so diligently and under very difficult conditions, right? Not being able to lobby face to face.
Yeah, it's been a little crazy here. Yeah, it's been a whole a learning curve for everybody here in DC on how to lobby. But I will say, our staff has still been we talk to congressional staff every day. That we do these sort of Zoom calls with congressional staff, just like we are with you. Members of Congress are still holding events like this. Some members of Congress are actually holding physical events on the Hill that our lobbyists have been attending in limited numbers. Obviously, this starting 2 weeks ago and running for the next sort of 2 weeks. Nobody's doing anything on the Hill, but hopefully things will start to be getting back to normal there as soon as it can.
One other question that popped up, a realtor asked, when is the current forbearance period scheduled to end? When does the current one expire?
So that is a great question, and it literally depends on the program. So there is a great article, and I'm going to find it right now, and I'm put it in here for you, Nick, to be able to post, that lists when all the different forbearances. So it literally depends on who your mortgage is with when the forbearance runs out. Most of them run through January or February. Some of them are more just like when the pandemic is over sort of language. Again, we think the Biden administration, when they come in on January 20th, because this is something they can simply do through a notice without Congress, we think they're going to extend them through September 30th. But I will find the link right now, Nick, and put it in so you can send it out. That has sort of what the different dates are depending on the type of program you have.
All right, great. Thank you. All right, Mr. President, back to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Megan. That this has been great to update everything as far as what Biden's plan is and sort of know where we are with that. And please send our thanks to the entire NAR team. Thank you so much for y'all's hard work, because it is so helpful to have this information presented in a way that we can understand it, know what's going on in DC. And now let's hear from our SCR General Counsel with a quick Labor Department update. I'm going to turn it over to Byron.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, realtors. So this update is on employees. So employees, typically for a brokerage, maybe your business model is you have licensees, associated licensees that are employees, or more likely you have admin staff that are employees. So what I'm talking about, it's very brief. It's about employees. Department of Labor has come out with a couple updates. First one, they implemented the test for independent contractors versus employees about control and ability to profit. And then regarding the Family First Corona Virus Relief Act, it was mandatory for emergency paid sick leave and emergency family medical leave. This was the bill that passed in March of last year, March 2020, that allowed employees to go on emergency paid sick leave, emergency family medical leave for up to 14 weeks and draw pay. It was paid for by a tax credit. So the update is, as of 2021, employees, this is a voluntary program. So employers can voluntarily give emergency paid sick leave, can voluntarily give emergency family medical leave under pay, and this is paid for by a tax credit system for the employer. So this, the emergency paid sick leave, emergency family medical leave is for the things like if the employee is under quarantine, if the employee is sick, if the employee is giving health care to a family member, or the employee has a child that due to school or child care facilities being shut down to coronavirus, they could qualify for voluntary emergency paid sick leave and emergency family medical leave. If you have any questions, you can contact the legal hotline at 803-772-5206. And emails are always just our first name at screaltors.org. So mine is Byron at screaltors.org and Austin at screaltors.org. That concludes my report. Thank you, Mr. President.
All right. Thank you, Byron. We've got a little bit of time left and just enough time for a quick legislative update from our Chief Advocacy Officer, Lindsay Jackson. Lindsay, what can you share from the first week of our new session?
Awesome. Thank you, Morris. So y'all, it's that time of the year again. The General Assembly is back in session, and I'll second Megan on that lobbying, and this new climate is new territory to all of us, but we're definitely thankful for all the relationships we have with our elected officials and staff, and that have really allowed us to be able to adapt pretty quickly to all of the changes and meeting virtually. So Tuesday was the first day of the regular session of the 124th General Assembly. The House and the Senate met in Columbia in statewide session, but they're planning to meet virtually over the next week. This week was pretty run of the mill. For the first week of session, the House swore in a few members that were not there during the organizational session. They read their pre-filed legislation across the desk. Ways and Means in the House met in their budget subcommittees. The Senate did a lot of the same. The Senate Medical Affairs Committee got an update from DHEC on the vaccine distribution, and the Senate LCI Committee heard from the Department of Workforce and Employment on their COVID response. They both had short days on the floor since they don't have any legislation on their calendars yet, with it being a new session. So the House is planning to return at the call of the Speaker. Tentatively, we're hearing it's going to be Tuesday, January the 26th. The Senate is planning to convene again in Columbia on Thursday, January the 21st. Both bodies will actually continue to meet virtually in subcommittee and committee over the next week to allow movement of the bill so they can actually get stuff on the calendar to bring up for consideration. So, following an interrupted 2020 session due to COVID, the General Assembly is really faced with a lot of lingering issues. They're still dealing with Sandy Cooper. They're still dealing with the fact that we're running off a continuing resolution and working on a state budget. And that's on top of conducting the regular business of the state this year and kind of working through some big issues like redistricting and then various COVID related matters, just to name a few. So this session is going to look a lot different than previous years, but I just wanted to let y'all know that SCR continues to represent you at the State House. We're ensuring that our priorities are heard by our lawmakers in person and now also virtually in the committee hearings and meetings. So just very quickly, our legislative committee has set an agenda for 2021. We're looking at issues including updating our real estate criminal background check criteria to include Social Security-based background checks to accompany fingerprinting. We're working with the South Carolina business community to support passage of hate crimes legislation. Extending the moratorium to prevent petroleum pipeline companies from exercising eminent domain, addressing housing discrimination through supporting the removal of discriminatory covenants and restrictions, and then providing for more seamless closings and eliminating some gaps in recording process through the use of electronic notarization. So in the coming weeks, stay tuned as I get back to my normal video updates. This week, we actually had just a text update go out to kind of give a brief update on what happened this week and a link to our 2021 priorities. So as y'all know, things kind of move quickly at the State House. So at any time, please feel free to reach out to me if you need any further information now or as we move on into the legislative session. So I will keep y'all posted as we move forward.
All right. Thank you, Lindsay. I think that's a wrap. Nick, you got any closing remarks for us?
Thank you, President Morris. I want to thank Megan, Lindsay, Byron, and of course, you, President Morris, for participating in this important update today. The feedback from our members on Facebook has been really positive. Thank you all for your time. I know, Megan, that you've probably get asked to do this all over the country, and we're thankful that you spent a few minutes with us here in South Carolina today. One thing I wanted to let y'all know regarding rental assistance is such a burning topic here in South Carolina. We, SCR, Lindsay reached out to the governor's office. We reached out to our local counties that are eligible to apply directly as well, making sure they were aware of the deadline, making sure they didn't miss the deadline, and get those applications through the Treasury in. So as soon as we have some more detailed information about how to apply and how that process works, we will, I can assure you, we'll be posting that in every one of our outlets in the coming days. But I've got three things I wanted to remind you real quick before we leave. Please make sure that you visit our Facebook page, facebook.com/SC Realtors on a regular basis. We provide updates like this and other industry news and other real estate information like our monthly market reports and other data that we share. So please come back, subscribe and like our videos, please. And make sure that you join us. We've got another webinar coming up next week on January 21st, where we roll out our Good Life Initiative. South Carolina's quality of life is above and beyond anything that any other state offers. Megan, we love to brag about how great it is to live, work, and play here in South Carolina. And we've developed a communications a tool, an initiative that helps promote, that helps our realtors promote just why it's so important to be involved in our communities, not just from a real estate perspective, but making sure that we've got good jobs, a good economic base, that we have good schools, that we have that we protect our environment, that we work together to continue to make South Carolina grow and thrive as one inclusive community all across the state. We're currently the #2 move-to state in the nation. We are growing by leaps and bounds, and how we manage that growth now is going to define what we look like in 20 or 30 years. The folks that are leaving New York and New Jersey to come to South Carolina are coming here for a reason, because they're leaving New York and New Jersey. And we don't want South Carolina to become like that. And we've got to work together to keep our community strong and healthy as we go forward. We're also really excited in the coming weeks. In February, on February 9th and 10th, we are launching our first ever virtual Capital Conference. This is our annual event where it's all things political. Why it's important to be involved in politics, why we advocate on your behalf, the issues that we're going to be talking about, how RPAC works, the importance of investing in RPAC. That's what we're all going to talk about on February 9th and 10th. If you're a political junkie, and I know some of you are, I know some of us are a little tired of politics right now, but we have to stay involved. Otherwise, y'all know my favorite saying, if we're not at the table, we're on the menu, right? So we've got to stay engaged and participate. Due to COVID, we're having to do this virtually, but we're going to have a lot of fun with this program this year. So I encourage you all to participate. So that's going to be a wrap for us today. Thank you for joining us. And I look forward to hearing from all of you. And stay safe, stay realtor strong. We'll see you soon.